Hello and welcome to my channel. Before I begin, I should mention that if you have been previously treated for being closed-minded, if you are experiencing symptoms of cognitive dissonance, or you are allergic to the truth, please consult a doctor before viewing this video. If you choose not to seek the advice of a medical professional and you develop any of the previously mentioned ailments or symptoms, the channel creator is not liable in any way, shape, or form. The purpose of this video is not intended to be disrespectful towards anyone that may have been affected by this case. Before I go any further, I have just one request. Please try to remember that most of us are here because we want and deserve to know the truth. In order to find the answers, you need to be willing to look at all the possibilities and scenarios, whether you agree with them or not. It's been well over a year, and people are still baffled at the amount of information released to the public on the Watts case. The information included discovery documents, body cam footage, 911 calls, and audio interviews of friends and coworkers. Also included were pointless videos such as the retrieval of the family dog and law enforcement escorting a family member of the accused to a nearby hotel. What makes the Watts case different from every other high-profile murder case? Many in the true crime community are fully aware that the investigation, or lack thereof, is full of holes, while others are accusing them of being crazy conspiracy theorists with their talk of accomplices, explosions, and cover-ups. But can you blame them? If we are seeking answers but are unable to get them from the most promising source, it's human nature to want to find the answers in whichever way possible. However, these questions still remain unanswered to this day. It's no secret that the government, the mainstream media, and the elite have and still do lie to the public for their selfish gain, whether it be to install fear, pass laws, push propaganda, etc. Therefore, it is important to remember this as you are watching this video. There are common characteristics that you can look for to indicate deception. Knowing them can help determine whether or not certain events are real or an orchestrated act designed to fool the public. It is still not certain where the murders actually took place. Did they occur in the house, the truck, the oil site, all of the above? How can you investigate a crime scene, take photos, and forensic samples if they don't know where the murders happened? I know what you're thinking. What about Survey 319? Survey 319 would be considered the secondary crime scene because it is related to the crime but not where the actual crime took place. Or is it? This is done on purpose to ultimately confuse and misdirect. In the past, autopsy and crime scene photos have been released or leaked in high-profile murder cases. John Benet Ramsey, Travis Alexander, and Sharon Tate, just to name a few. In the Watts case, there were no crime scene photos besides the dirt grave and a couple of items that Chris left at the oil site. Sure, there were photos taken in the house as well. However, I'm talking about real crime scene DNA evidence such as blood, hair, skin, or bodies, something that indicates a murder or even a crime was actually committed. There were no autopsy photos of a hand, foot, or even an x-ray released in the Watts case. The autopsies also appeared to be incomplete. One example is the blank diagrams that were included with the discovery. When it is a confirmed homicide, the coroner must perform a full and complete autopsy on a victim. This is a major red flag when investigators fail to show any proof of deceased victims or an actual crime scene. If a suspect ends up dead, there was no trial, or the case was quickly closed, this is another major red flag. For example, in the Las Vegas shooting, Stephen Paddock allegedly committed suicide by shooting himself in the mouth right before SWAT entered his hotel room, even though images show he also had what appeared to be a bullet wound to his chest. This is extremely convenient since you can't put a person on trial who is dead. This means no witnesses, evidence gathering, autopsy photos, or ballistic reports. Having a trial would only bring out inconsistencies that contradict the official narrative. We know that Chris did not ask for a lawyer, confessed after only 4 hours of being interrogated, if that's what you want to call it, and although law enforcement only had circumstantial evidence against him, he agreed to a plea deal, and roughly 3 months after the murders, the case was closed, which is exceptionally fast. Again, it's better to close the case quickly in order to avoid any inconsistencies that would contradict the official narrative. Not only that, but it makes District Attorney Michael Rourke look good and gets him another conviction in his bucket by putting the alleged murderer behind bars. At the same time, he also saves the taxpayers a ton of money and makes it appear as though he has the public's best interest in mind. If you are left with more questions than answers, this is another red flag. In the Las Vegas shooting, Sheriff Joe Lombardo was asked about an inconsistency in the official timeline of events by an independent journalist at a press conference. Lombardo seems immediately annoyed and refuses to take her question. During press conferences, journalists are usually only allowed to ask scripted questions that only follow the official narrative.
But we got one exchange that I want to play now. I appreciate what you're saying, Ken. Ma'am, that's not how we conduct this service, okay? If I'm presented with a question... Because the FBI has reported that... That's not how I conduct press conferences, ma'am. Has the official timeline changed? Please stop asking your question. There's a decorum that we have here.
In the Watts case, the inconsistency with Nicole Kessinger's deleted search history was brought to Rourke's attention. When asked to explain, he said, "The dates to which you are referring in 2017, where it appears that she Googled or otherwise searched Shanann, was data that came off of her phone. It is not a typographical error in the report. The detectives are reporting what was contained in the data from her phone. I don't know the answer to the question or why or how those dates ended up in her phone. We did not get to the point in our investigation of attempting to independently verify that or not because Chris Watts pled guilty. My job is to investigate and prosecute who is responsible for the deaths of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. We have done that. I have no information nor any belief that any other criminal defendant is out there who is responsible for their death in any way, shape, or form. I have absolutely no reason to investigate Nicole Kessinger at this point in time," he said. "This is not a witch hunt."
The girlfriend you referenced in court, can you give us a better idea of her role in the investigation, how forthcoming she was, and how she helped?
She originally came forward and spoke to investigators on her own volition. Prior to the time, unfortunately, that she came in and spoke with investigators, she had deleted all of the information off of her phone that had any connection between her and Chris Watts. That hampered the investigation. That hampered our ability to get that electronic digital connection between the two. She was interviewed on multiple occasions. I believe that for the most part she was forthcoming in the course of those investigations. We don't have any reason to believe that she had any prior knowledge or involvement in the death of Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico. I think that's the best way I can answer that.
Two people that did a great job covering the Las Vegas shooting were Paladin and Mr. Burgundy. The following clip is the two of them talking about the Las Vegas shooting.
Indicative of the media nowadays. It's just like these releases. We're not getting what we should be getting, and the people who are in the lawsuit, which are the media, they're the plaintiff in the case against LVMPD to get the releases. They should be the ones that have gone back to court and say, "Hey, judge, we are not getting what you ordered us to get." But they're not, and I don't even think they're reporting on it anymore. I mean, I think they did initially, but anytime they did report on it, it was maybe a 15 or 30-second blip on the 6 o'clock news, and it was basically something that went along with the narrative. And I know people sometimes hate to hear that term that way, but I don't know how else to term it. I don't know what else you call it. But anyway, yeah, and so they're not doing their job either, in my opinion. They should be the ones going back to court saying, "Hey, judge, we are not getting what we're supposed to get."
Well, you brought up an interesting point because I've often wondered that. So, as we know, we all feel like, they're under court order to release all evidence in this case. So, who is it that's really going to, to be able to, who's going to call their shit on this?
It's very discouraging.
Very much.
We're trying to get evidence, and they're manipulating it to only give us what they want us to see, as opposed to what the law requires them to provide to us. And that's that's disheartening to me.
Right. I couldn't agree more with you.
Are you starting to see the similarities yet? As Paladin just stated, they only release what they want us to see and what fits the official narrative. They do this on purpose, and it ultimately sends everyone into a state of confusion. With all the information released, why do we have hardly any answers? In the Watts case, they released an almost 2,000-page discovery. However, most of it is duplicate information, many of the pages only have a few sentences on them, and there are over 200 pages of letters that people sent to Chris in prison. Why were these letters even put in the discovery in the first place, considering they have nothing to do with the investigation itself? In the Las Vegas shooting, Stephen Paddock's internet search history was vague and conveniently fit the official narrative. Chris and Kessinger's internet searches were vague as well, with nothing in between and with almost no explanation for them. Once the storyline is set, other questions or opinions are ignored, and anything that slightly contradicts the official narrative is not considered legitimate. Mistakes are bound to happen, and when they do, the story will change or new information will come out in order to strengthen the official narrative. The more horrific and shocking the crime is, the less likely people will question its authenticity. And those who dare speak up are accused of being crazy, a conspiracy theorist, insensitive, and a terrible human being. And what's more horrific than killing innocent concertgoers or murdering your wife and children and dumping their bodies, similar to the way a person always throws away their sacked lunch? This is a great strategy because I am, or at least I was, one of those people. Not because I was afraid of being called crazy or a conspiracy theorist. That doesn't bother me. I was more worried about hurting or offending people who may have been affected emotionally from the case. However, there are some that are not afraid to speak up when they begin to notice a string of inconsistencies in a narrative. In the Watts case, people began to question where the vivid doorbell footage was of Shanann coming home from her trip from Arizona. The footage should have been included with the discovery, however, it wasn't released until people began to question its existence. Then there's a letter Chris wrote and gave to his sister that came out, possibly to substantiate Chris accusing Shanann of killing the girls. People began to question why Chris searched for the
Who would tell us, and who do tell us, you need to look into Nikki more, Nikki Kissinger. All the way from the extreme end of things being Nikki's the one who ordered the hit.
She was there, I'm in the basement.
She was there. So the extreme is she's the one who told Chris to do it. She's the real problem. All the way, that's the extreme side, and then all the way to, well, there were these texts where she was infatuated, she was in love, she was saying how good Chris was in the sack, and maybe we should look at her more. What would you say to those people?
Why would veteran law enforcement agents need to ask a convicted murderer for advice about investigating someone connected to the case? I believe this was their strange way of attempting to convince people on social media that Kissinger had no involvement in their murders. Once again, it goes against the official narrative that Chris, and only Chris, killed his wife and children. At the end of the interview, Tammy Lee asks if she can take a picture of Chris and assures him that she will not release it to the public. Chris allows Tammy to take his picture, and although she promises not to release it, she does it anyway. But why would Tammy do this? It just so happens this was also around the time people started to question if Chris was really in prison, because he isn't listed as an inmate at Dodge Correctional or any other prison for that matter. The Las Vegas shooting documents, such as body cam footage, witness and officer statements, 911 calls, etc., were released in a number of what they called batches over the course of a year. As for the Watts case, there was Discovery Number 1, Discovery Number 2, the doorbell footage of Shanann, more photos of Chris and Kissinger, and the creepy giggle voicemail that Kissinger left for Chris. All of these should have been released with the discovery in the beginning. If the mainstream media immediately pushes the official narrative and the story becomes national news, this is a big red flag. Chris giving the news interviews on his porch was a perfect way to get the media involved, and if the suspect doesn't fit the profile, this is another red flag. The Las Vegas shooter, Stephen Paddock, did not fit the profile of a mass shooter. Friends, family, and anyone else who knew him described him as quiet, and he mainly kept to himself.
Down well more than 1,000 leads in this investigation. While some of it has helped create a better profile into the madness of this suspect, we do not still have a clear motive or reason why. I can assure you that we are aware of all aspects of this case, to include the rumor, innuendo, and supposition by many in the public. And I get it. We all want answers. In the past, terror attacks or mass murder incidents, motive was made very clear in most of those cases by a note that was left, by a social media post, by a telephone call that was made, by investigators mining computer data. Today, in our investigation, we don't have any of that uncovered. I wish we did. We will and are continuing to investigate with great tenacity and hope to arrive at an answer.
Chris Watts did not fit the profile of a family annihilator. Everyone who knew him described him as being the shy, quiet type, that he was a good husband and an amazing father.
Can you talk about what you think the motive was, or the reason for a seemingly normal father to do something so horrific?
Like I said this morning, I think that based upon his Google searches, his cell phone searches, some of the things that he was doing while Shanann and the girls were in North Carolina, I think it became pretty obvious that he found a new love interest. And for whatever reason in his mind, divorce wasn't an option. I can't speak as to why anyone would take the steps that he did, but during the course of our investigation, other than the normal stressors of financial stress that I think most of us have, the occasional marital stress, we couldn't find anything else that was a significant enough motive to annihilate your family in the manner that he did.
Another red flag to look out for is predictive programming or foreknowledge prior to the event. A great example of predictive programming is with 9/11. The amount of programming used prior to 9/11 is overwhelming. Some may argue that the Twin Towers were well-known buildings and were extremely tall, so it makes sense that a lot of movies and TV shows would show planes flying into the towers or the buildings. But there are some examples that are just too accurate to be considered coincidental.
You're saying our government plans to commit a terrorist act against a domestic airline?
There you go. Indicting the entire government as usual. It's a faction. A small faction.
For what possible gain?
The Cold War's over, John. But with no clear enemy to stockpile against, the arms market's flat. But bring down a fully loaded 727 into the middle of New York City, and you'll find a dozen tin pot dictators all over the world just clamoring to take responsibility and begging to be smart bombed.
I can't believe it. This is about increasing arms sales. When?
Tonight?
Manual override.
We also have the American Horror Story trailer that appeared on HTV that practically mirrored the case. I can assure you that this was not by chance. It was deliberately put there for us to see.
Diesel. Yeah, I thought nothing.
Nothing for the rest of the day.
Oh, that's it. She's pregnant as well.
How far along?
14, 15 weeks. That's why her friend said it was low blood sugar. She's pregnant as well. She's pregnant as well.
This is one of the strangest moments in the case, in my opinion. Was this another line in Chris's script? Unbeknownst to many, the predictive programming starts as far back as Season 1 and continues throughout the entire anthology. I have made a total of 6 videos covering this predictive programming. One question I get a lot is, what is the point of predictive programming? It's been said that the people that orchestrate these events use predictive programming because they believe in karma. They think that if they leave us hints before they carry out the plans and we're too stupid to realize or notice the clues, then that's our own fault. Therefore, they will not have any bad karma on their hands. Another theory is that they are using subliminal messages to subconsciously condition us so that when the event happens, we are prepared for it and won't find it ridiculous or unbelievable. Let's not forget that Blackstone, a company that is well known for being corrupted, owns Vivint and also has shares with Anadarko and 21st Century Fox. At the time of the murders, 21st Century Fox owned the FX network that airs American Horror Story, until Disney bought them out in March of 2018. If evidence is destroyed, ends up missing, or the investigative work appears to be lacking, it is another red flag to look out for. With the Las Vegas shooting, the concert grounds were never treated as a crime scene and they were immediately cleaned up and evidence was thrown out and removed. Stephen Paddock's body was cremated roughly 3 months after the shooting and while the investigation was still open. This also happened with 9/11 when the debris from the towers was immediately cleaned up and sent to China before any testing could be done. Chris's work truck that was used to allegedly transport the bodies of his victims before disposing of them was auctioned off soon after the murders. The Watts house was never treated as a crime scene, and people were allowed to walk in and out of the house as they pleased, such as police, lawyers, news reporters, friends, and family. Officer Coonrod should never let Chris, Nicole Atkinson, her son Nicholas, or her daughter Madison in the house, period. Officers never know what they could be walking into. What if there was an intruder inside, or God forbid Shanann or the girls were deceased and Nicole Atkinson's daughter found them first? She would have been absolutely traumatized. It's also strange that no one called out for Shanann and the girls. You also have sketchy dog handlers that didn't appear to know what they were doing or purposely caused their dog to give misleading hits. This was done on purpose to mislead because nobody was killed in the house. Ring doorbells, Vivint Inc., and Lavelle had a ton of free publicity throughout the case. Google and YouTube, Dr. Phil, Dr. Oz, Lifetime, Oxygen, Reels, Discovery, all benefited. Around the same time Chris allegedly committed the murders, Anadarko and the oil and gas companies were close to losing billions of dollars if Proposition 112 passed.
When fracking comes to a city, it puts our health and safety at risk. With over 1,200 peer-reviewed research articles, the increased risk of asthma, birth defects, and cancer are well documented. In Colorado, fracking wells can be drilled within 500 feet of homes and 1,000 feet from school buildings. Aside from the health issues, these wells are loud, unsightly, and dangerous. Let's keep our neighborhoods safe and increase the buffer zone to 2,500 feet. Vote yes on Proposition 112 for safer setbacks from fracking. Donate now at coloradorising.org.
Here is what Proposition 112 would do to the already limited surface locations in Colorado. All of the red-shaded areas are now off-limits from future drilling just from the 2,500-foot town and housing development setbacks. Here you can see the effect of increasing the house and occupied structure setback to Proposition 112 standard. As you can see, a 2,500-foot setback for every house virtually takes away all available surface locations in the region. Streams, rivers, lakes, wetlands, and now even drainages, which is a very general term, will have 2,500-foot setbacks. Even if an area is not heavily populated, drainages and areas deemed vulnerable by Proposition 112 will virtually ban the majority of future drilling locations throughout the state. All of the additional current regulatory setbacks will also still be in place. As you can see, no drillable surface locations exist on the map, meaning that the private property and rights of mineral owners have effectively been taken away without compensation.
Another reason for all of this could be an attempt to take away our free speech. Not once, but twice, the root checks have asked people to stop talking about the case, yet they purposely go on social media and engage themselves with channels. All this does is add fuel to the fire and ultimately makes people talk about the case more.